Deep in the heart of space, where stars looked like scattered diamonds against black cloth, the Imperial ship Sovereign's Grace moved through the void like a sleeping giant. Its hull stretched for miles, covered in gleaming metal that caught starlight and threw it back in brilliant flashes. Inside this massive vessel, thousands of beings from across the galaxy went about their daily work, but all of them shared one unspoken truth. Their Empress had not walked in 15 years. Empress Lyra sat in her floating throne, a beautiful piece of technology that hummed softly as it kept her suspended 3 feet above the floor of her private chamber. The throne was made from rare crystals that glowed with a soft blue light, and it moved wherever she willed it to go. But for all its beauty and advanced technology, it was still a prison. Her legs, once strong enough to leap across chasms and run faster than most vehicles, now lay still and lifeless beneath robes of silver and gold. The accident had happened during a peace mission to the Outer Rim worlds. Lyra remembered the explosion, the way her ship had been torn apart by hidden weapons, and the terrible moment when she realized she could not feel her legs anymore. The doctors said her spine was damaged, but it was more than that. Something deeper had been broken. Her connection to what her people called the life flow, the energy that ran through every living thing and gave the Althari their incredible healing powers. For 15 years, the best doctors in the galaxy had tried to fix what was broken. They had used machines that could rebuild entire organs, medicines that could cure diseases that had killed millions, and even ancient techniques that few remembered how to perform. Nothing worked. The Empress, who had once been known for her strength and grace, was now trapped in a floating chair, watching her empire slowly fall apart around her. In the medical bay, Dr. Nala finished reading the latest test results and shook her head sadly. She was the chief physician aboard the Sovereign's Grace, a tall woman with skin that shimmered like oil on water and eyes that could see things others missed. She had been trying to help the Empress for 10 years now, ever since the previous chief physician had given up hope and retired to a quiet planet far from the capital. The neural pathways are still blocked, Dr. Nala told her assistant, a young man named Finn who had joined the medical team only last year. Whatever happened to her during that attack, it did not just damage her spine, it damaged her connection to the life flow itself. Without that connection, her body cannot heal the way it should. Finn looked at the test results on his screen, trying to understand the complex patterns of brain activity and energy flow that made no sense to him. But surely there must be something we can do. Some new treatment, some experimental procedure. Dr. Nala sighed and walked to the window that looked out into space. We have tried everything, Finn. Every treatment known to our people, and many that are not. The Empress is not just paralyzed. She is cut off from the very thing that makes us who we are. It would be like asking a bird to fly with no wings, or a fish to swim with no water. Down in the engine rooms, far from the medical bay and the royal quarters, Ben Torres was having his own problems. He had arrived on the Sovereign's Grace only 3 days ago, replacing an old mechanic named Gus, who had finally decided he was too old for the job of keeping a ship this size running properly. Ben was human, which made him unusual on a ship mostly filled with Althari. But he was also very good at fixing things that other people said could not be fixed. Right now, he was looking at a cooling system that should have been impossible to break, but had somehow managed to stop working anyway. The Althari engineers had been standing around it for 2 weeks, running tests and checking their manuals, but none of them could figure out what was wrong. Ben had taken one look at it and immediately seen the problem. Someone had installed a part backwards about 6 months ago, and the system had been slowly wearing itself out ever since. Hand me that wrench, Ben said to Kai, one of the Althari engineers who had been assigned to help him. Kai was young for his people, only about 50 years old, with the typical pale blue skin and large eyes that all Althari shared. He had been very polite to Ben, but it was clear he did not think a human could understand their advanced technology. Are you certain that is the correct tool? Kai asked, holding the wrench but not giving it to Ben yet. Perhaps we should consult the technical manual first or contact the engineering department for guidance. Ben wiped sweat from his forehead and tried not to lose his patience. Kid, I have been fixing machines since before you were born. Trust me on this one. He took the wrench from Kai and got back to work, loosening bolts and carefully removing the part that had been installed wrong. Sometimes the solution to a problem is not in the manual. Sometimes you just have to look at the thing and figure out what it needs. As he worked, Ben thought about the stories he had heard since arriving on the ship. Everyone talked about the Empress and her condition, usually in whispers and with sad looks. They spoke of her like she was already dead, even though she was still ruling the empire from her floating throne. Ben had seen leaders before who had been injured or sick, and he knew that giving up hope was often the worst thing you could do. The cooling system hummed back to life as Ben finished his repairs, and Kai stared at it in amazement. "How did you know to do that?" he asked. "Our best engineers could not solve this problem." Ben packed up his tools and smiled. Sometimes an outsider can see things that people on the inside miss. Your engineers were so focused on following the rules that they could not see the simple answer right in front of them. He patted Kai on the shoulder and started walking toward the door. "Remember that, kid. Just because something has always been done one way does not mean it is the right way." As Ben left the engine room, he did not know that his words would soon prove more important than he could imagine. Somewhere far above him in her floating throne, Empress Lyra was about to meet the man who would change everything. Word traveled fast on a ship, even one as large as the Sovereign's Grace. Within 2 days of Ben's arrival, stories of the new human mechanic were being told in every department. He had fixed the cooling system that had stumped the engineering core for weeks. He had figured out why the artificial gravity was flickering in Section 7 when the best technicians had given up. Most impressive of all, he had done it without reading a single manual or asking for permission from his supervisors. Chief, Engineer Drac was not happy about this. He was a proud Althari who had spent over 100 years learning every detail about Imperial ship technology. The idea that some human could waltz onto his ship and start fixing things without proper training was deeply offensive to him. He sat in his office reading reports about Ben's unauthorized repairs, and his pale blue skin was turning darker with anger. "He is dangerous," Drac told his assistant Vera. "He does not follow procedures. He does not fill out the proper forms. He just looks at broken equipment and starts taking it apart without any regard for safety protocols or chain of command." Vera, who was much younger than Drac and had worked with Ben on the gravity problem, shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "But sir, his repairs work perfectly. The cooling system has never run better, and the artificial gravity in Section 7 is completely stable now." Drac slammed his hand on his desk. "That is not the point. What happens when he makes a mistake? What happens when his human methods cause a catastrophic failure? We cannot run a starship based on luck and guesswork." Meanwhile, Ben was completely unaware of the trouble he was causing in the engineering department. He was crawling through a maintenance tunnel in the royal section of the ship, following a power cable that was supposed to be carrying energy to the Empress's private quarters, but was somehow losing half its power along the way. The tunnel was barely big enough for a human, which made it perfect for this kind of work. The Althari were all much taller than humans, so they had to send maintenance robots to check the small spaces. Ben followed the cable for several hundred feet, checking connections and testing voltage levels with his portable scanner. Everything looked normal until he reached a junction box near the Empress's chambers. There he found something that made him shake his head in disbelief. Someone had installed a power regulator that was completely wrong for this system. It was designed for much lower energy levels, so it was constantly overheating and reducing the power flow to protect itself. "Amateur hour," Ben muttered to himself as he started removing the wrong part. He had a replacement in his tool bag that would work much better. As he worked, he could hear voices coming from the room above him, the Empress's private chamber. He was not trying to listen, but sound carried easily through the thin floor panels. "Your Majesty, please try to move your toes," a woman's voice was saying. "Even the smallest movement would show that the treatment is working." "I have been trying for 15 years, Dr. Nala," came another voice, softer and filled with exhaustion. "I cannot feel anything below my waist. The life flow does not reach those parts of my body anymore." Ben stopped working and listened more carefully. He had heard about the Empress's condition, of course, but hearing her talk about it directly was different. She sounded like someone who had given up hope long ago, and that bothered him more than he expected it to. Perhaps we should try the neural stimulation again, Dr. Nala suggested. The new equipment from the core worlds might be more effective. No, the Empress's voice was firm. We have tried every machine, every medicine, every technique known to our people. If the life flow cannot heal me, then nothing can. I have accepted this, Doctor. Perhaps you should too. Ben finished installing the new power regulator and tested it with his scanner. The energy flow immediately improved by 60%. He packed up his tools and started crawling back through the tunnel, but he could not stop thinking about what he had heard. The conversation reminded him of something his grandfather used to say. There is no such thing as a problem that cannot be solved, only problems that have not met the right person yet. An hour later, Ben was in the ship's database center, reading everything he could find about Althari biology and the thing they called the life flow. Most of it was way over his head. Complex discussions of bioenergy fields and neural pathway, integration that required years of medical training to understand. But some of it made sense to him, especially the parts about how the life flow was distributed through the body, using a combination of natural nerve networks and artificial implants. Interesting, Ben said to himself as he read about the implants. Every Althari had them installed when they were young, tiny devices that helped their bodies channel and control the life flow more effectively. The implants were grown rather than built, using a technology that combined biology and engineering in ways that humans were only beginning to understand. The next morning, Ben was doing routine maintenance in the corridor outside the Empress's chambers when she emerged from her room. Her floating throne moved silently through the doorway, and Ben got his first good look at the most powerful person in the galaxy. She was smaller than he had expected, probably about his age, with pale, blue skin that seemed to glow slightly in the artificial light. Her hair was long and silver, and her eyes were the deep purple color that marked her as royal blood. Ben immediately dropped what he was doing and tried to bow, but he was not sure how humans were supposed to show respect to alien royalty. He ended up in an awkward half-crouch that made him feel ridiculous. Empress Lyra stopped her throne and looked at him with curiosity. You must be the new mechanic I have been hearing about. Ben Torres, is that correct? Yes, Your Majesty, Ben said, straightening up. I was just checking the power systems in this section. I hope I am not disturbing you. Not at all. I understand. You have been solving problems that our own engineers could not handle. That is quite impressive. Ben shrugged. Just looking at things with fresh eyes, I guess. Sometimes when you have been staring at a problem for too long, you stop seeing the obvious solutions. Lyra studied him for a moment. There was something different about this human, something direct and honest that she rarely encountered in her daily life. Most people spoke to her with careful formality, choosing their words to avoid giving offense. This man seemed to just say what he was thinking. Tell me, Mr. Torres, she said. What would you do if you encountered a problem that everyone told it was impossible to solve? Ben did not hesitate. I would assume they were wrong and start looking for a solution anyway. In my experience, impossible usually just means nobody has tried the right approach yet. For the first time in years, Empress Lyra smiled. Even if the problem had stumped the greatest experts for 15 years. Ben looked directly at her, and she saw something in his eyes that surprised her. Not pity or reverence, but genuine interest and determination. Especially then, Your Majesty, the longer a problem goes unsolved, the more likely it is that everyone is making the same mistake. As Ben gathered his tools and continued down the corridor, Lyra found herself thinking about his words. For 15 years, she had been told that her condition was permanent, that the damage to her connection with the life flow could not be repaired. But what if they were all making the same mistake? What if the solution was something simple that everyone had overlooked because they were too focused on the complex aspects of the problem? That night, alone in her chambers, Lyra made a decision that would have shocked her doctors and advisors. She was going to talk to the stubborn human, mechanic again, and this time she was going to ask him to look at her problem with those fresh eyes he was so proud of. 3 days passed before Empress Lyra worked up the courage to contact Ben directly. She had spent those days thinking about their conversation, wondering if she was being foolish to hope that a human mechanic might see something that Althari doctors had missed. But hope, once awakened, was hard to ignore. She sent a private message to his communication device asking him to come to her chambers that evening, after his shift ended. Ben was surprised by the message, but he was also curious. He had been thinking about the Empress and her condition ever since their brief conversation. During his work around the ship, he had started asking subtle questions about Althari biology and the life flow, trying to understand how it all worked. Most people were happy to talk about it since it was such a fundamental part of their culture. When evening came, Ben made his way to the royal section of the ship. The corridors here were different from the working areas he was used to, wider, with better lighting and decorations on the walls that probably cost more than most people made in a year. Guards stood at regular intervals, but they had been told to expect him, so they let him pass without question. Empress Lyra was waiting for him in a smaller room next to her main chamber. It was more comfortable than the formal throne room, with soft chairs and a table covered in books and data tablets. Her floating throne was positioned near the window that showed the stars streaming past as the ship traveled through space. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Torres," she said as he entered. "Please sit down. I wanted to talk to you about something important." Ben sat in one of the chairs, feeling awkward in such fancy surroundings. "What can I do for you, Your Majesty?" Lyra hesitated for a moment, then decided to be direct. "I want you to look at my condition, not as a subject, not as your ruler, but as a problem that needs solving. I know you are not a doctor, but you said that sometimes fresh eyes can see solutions that experts miss." Ben was quiet for a long moment, thinking carefully about what she was asking. "Your Majesty, I do not want to give you false hope. I am just a mechanic. I fix engines and power systems, not people." "But you understand how complex systems work," Lyra said. "You understand how different parts connect to each other, how energy flows through networks, how problems in one area can affect other areas. From what I have learned about you, you approach problems differently than most people." Ben nodded slowly. "That is true. I do tend to think of everything as connected systems. When something is not working right, I try to trace the problem back to its source rather than just treating the symptoms." "That is exactly what I need," Lyra said. "For 15 years, my doctors have been trying to treat my legs, trying to make them work again. But what if the real problem is not in my legs? What if it is somewhere else in the system?" Ben leaned forward in his chair, his interest growing. "Tell me about the life flow. How does it actually work in your body? Not the mystical parts that humans would not understand, but the practical physical parts." Lyra was surprised by the question. Most people who asked about the life flow wanted to know about its spiritual significance or its role in Althari culture. Ben was the first person to ask about the mechanics of it. "The life flow is energy," she explained. "It exists naturally in all living things, but my people have learned to control and direct it using bioneural implants. The implants are installed when we are children, and they grow with us, becoming part of our nervous system. They help us channel the life flow to heal injuries, enhance our physical abilities, and even extend our lifespans." Ben nodded. "So these implants are like control circuits for biological energy. And your implants were damaged in the accident?" "That is what the doctors believe. The implants in my spinal cord were severely damaged, and they think that is why I cannot access the life flow in my lower body anymore. But they have tried to repair the implants many times. They have replaced damaged components, tried to grow new connections, even attempted to install completely new implants. Nothing has worked." Ben was quiet again, thinking. Then he asked, a question that surprised Lyra. "What if the implants are not the problem? What if they are working fine, but they are getting the wrong instructions?" Lyra stared at him. "What do you mean?" "In mechanical systems, sometimes a component fails, not because it is broken, but because it is being told to do the wrong thing. A perfectly good motor will burn out if you send too much power to it, or a valve will jam if you try to open it when the pressure is too high." Ben stood up and started pacing, his mind working on the problem. What if your spinal implants are receiving conflicting signals? What if the accident damaged the control systems that tell the implants how to work? Dr. Nala would have been horrified if she had known what was happening in the Empress's chambers that night. Lyra allowed Ben to examine her medical records, showing him scan after scan of her spine and nervous system. Ben could not understand most of the technical details, but he could recognize patterns, and he could see when something looked wrong. "There," he said, pointing to a scan taken just after the accident. "Do you see this area here? The implants look fine, but there is damage to the tissue around them. What if that damage is causing interference?" Lyra looked at the scan with new eyes. The doctors focused on repairing the implants themselves. They barely paid attention to the surrounding tissue because it looked like minor damage. Minor damage to a support structure can cause major problems in the whole system, Ben said. "I have seen it 100 times with machines. You fix the main component, but if the mounting brackets are bent or the connecting cables are damaged, the whole thing still will not work right." They spent hours going through her medical history, with Ben asking questions that no doctor had ever thought to ask. He wanted to know about the energy patterns in her implants, about how the signals traveled from her brain to her spine, about what happened when she tried to consciously control the life flow. "Your Majesty, I have an idea," Ben said finally, "but it is going to sound crazy and it might be dangerous. Tell me, what if we could reset your spinal implants? Not repair them or replace them, but actually shut them down completely and then restart them. Like rebooting a computer that has gotten stuck in an error loop." Lyra felt her heart skip. "Is that possible?" "I do not know. But I think the problem might be that your implants are stuck trying to execute commands that were corrupted during the accident. They keep trying to establish connections that cannot be made because of the interference from the damaged tissue. If we could clear those corrupted commands and let the implants start fresh?" "The doctors would never agree to try something like that," Lyra said. "They would say it is too risky, that we could make the damage worse." Ben looked at her seriously. "They might be right. I'm not going to lie to you, this could go very wrong. But from what you have told me, you have been getting worse over the years, not staying the same. The interference is slowly damaging more of your nervous system. If we do nothing, you might lose even more function." Lyra closed her eyes and thought about 15 years of failed treatments, 15 years of watching her empire slowly lose faith in her leadership, 15 years of being trapped in a floating chair while her body grew weaker. When she opened her eyes again, Ben saw determination there. "What would you need to try this reset?" she asked. "Access to your medical bay, some specialized equipment, and a lot of luck," Ben said. "But most importantly, I would need you to trust me completely. If we are going to do this, we have to do it right, and we have to do it in secret. If your doctors find out what we are planning, they will stop us before we can even start." Lyra smiled, and for the first time in years it was a smile full of hope rather than resignation. "Mr. Torres, I have spent 15 years listening to experts tell me what cannot be done. I think it is time I listen to someone who specializes in making impossible things possible." The next few weeks were the most nerve-wracking of Ben's life. He and Empress Lyra had to plan their secret project carefully, finding times when the medical bay would be empty, and making sure they had all the equipment they needed without arousing suspicion. Ben spent his days doing normal maintenance work around the ship, but his evenings were devoted to studying Althari medical technology and preparing for what they both knew would be an incredibly dangerous procedure. The hardest part was keeping their plan secret from Dr. Nala and the other medical staff. Lyra had to continue with her regular checkups and treatments, pretending that she had accepted her condition while secretly working with Ben to find a solution. She became an expert at hiding her growing excitement and hope behind the mask of resigned acceptance that everyone expected to see. Ben's biggest challenge was getting access to the specialized equipment he needed. The medical bay had machines that could monitor and manipulate the bioneural implants, but he could not just walk in and start using them without causing suspicion. He had to find reasons to be in the medical section, doing maintenance work, on systems that were related to what he really needed. "The power coupling on scanner array 3 is acting up again," Ben told Dr. Nala one afternoon, carrying his tool bag into the medical bay. I need to run some tests to make sure it is not affecting the accuracy of your readings. Dr. Nala nodded absently, too busy with her own work to pay much attention to what the human mechanic was doing. This was exactly what Ben had hoped for. While he pretended to check power connections, he was actually learning how to operate the bio-neural monitoring equipment, memorizing the control sequences, and understanding how the machines interfaced with Althari implants. The first attempt at the reset procedure took place 3 weeks after their initial conversation. Lyra came to the medical bay late at night, claiming she was having trouble sleeping and wanted Dr. Nala to prescribe something to help her rest. Of course, Dr. Nala had gone to bed hours earlier, which left Lyra alone with Ben in the medical facility. Ben had prepared everything in advance. He had the monitoring equipment ready, the neural interface devices calibrated, and a plan for how to safely shut down and restart Lyra's spinal implants. What he did not have was any real confidence that it would work. "Are you sure about this, Your Majesty?" he asked as he helped her onto the examination table. "Once I start the shutdown sequence, there is no going back. If something goes wrong, then I will be no worse off than I am now," Lyra said firmly. "I trust you, Ben. You have given me more hope in the past month than I have had in 15 years. Ben connected the monitoring cables to ports behind Lyra's ears, trying to keep his hands steady as he worked. The screens around them came alive with displays of brain activity, neural pathway function, and bioenergy flow patterns. Looking at the readouts, Ben could see exactly what he had suspected. Lyra's spinal implants were caught in an endless loop, trying to execute damaged commands and failing over and over again. "I can see the problem," he said, pointing to the patterns on the screen. "Your implants are receiving signals from your brain, but they cannot process them correctly because of the interference from the damaged tissue, so they keep trying the same commands repeatedly, which is actually making the interference worse over time." Lyra watched the displays with fascination. "No one has ever shown me this before. The doctors always said the technical details would be too complicated for me to understand." "The technical details are not that complicated," Ben said. "They just require you to think of your body as a system instead of a mystery." He took a deep breath and placed his hands on the control panel. "Ready?" "Ready." Ben initiated the shutdown sequence, and immediately the room filled with alarms. Lyra's bioenergy readings dropped dramatically as her spinal implants went offline, and for a terrifying moment, Ben thought he had made a terrible mistake. But then the readings stabilized at a low but safe level, and the alarm stopped. "How do you feel?" Ben asked. "Strange," Lyra said. "I can feel nothing below my waist, not even the phantom sensations I have had for years. It is like that part of my body has gone completely silent." Ben worked quickly to clear the corrupted command sequences from the implant's memory banks. This was the most dangerous part of the procedure, because he had to manually delete data without knowing exactly what it all meant. He was essentially performing brain surgery using tools he barely understood, guided only by his intuition about how systems worked. After an hour of careful work, Ben was ready to restart the implants. "This is it," he said. "When I bring them back online, they should start fresh without all the corrupted data that has been causing problems." The restart sequence took nearly 20 minutes, with various systems coming back online one at a time. Ben watched the displays anxiously, looking for signs that the reset had worked. At first, nothing seemed different. Then, slowly, the neural pathway readings began to change. "Ben," Lyra whispered, "I think I can feel something." But the feeling lasted only a few seconds before fading away again. The implants were working, but the connection was still unstable. Ben realized that clearing the corrupted data was only part of the solution. Lyra's brain had to relearn how to communicate with her spinal implants after 15 years of failed attempts. "We need to do this several more times," Ben explained as he helped Lyra back to her floating throne. "Each session should help your nervous system remember how to work with the implants properly, but it is going to take time, and it is going to be exhausting for both of us." Over the next month, they repeated the procedure 6 more times. Each session was a little easier than the last, and each time, Lyra's connection to her lower body grew a little stronger, but the process was taking a toll on both of them. Lyra was dealing with constant pain as her nervous system slowly healed, and Ben was suffering from exposure to the bio-neural energy fields, which were gradually affecting his own nervous system in ways that worried him. "Maybe we should stop," Lyra said after the 6th session, when she noticed that Ben's hands were shaking uncontrollably. "You are hurting yourself to help me." "I am fine," Ben insisted, though they both knew he was lying. His exposure to Althari bioenergy was causing neurological damage that could be permanent if he continued, but he was determined to see the project through to completion. The 7th session was scheduled for a night when the ship would be passing through a region of space with unusual energy fields. Ben thought the external energy might help boost the effectiveness of the reset procedure, but it also meant they would have to work while the ship's systems were less stable than usual. As Ben prepared the equipment, alarms suddenly began sounding throughout the ship. Emergency lights flashed red, and the voice of Captain Rex came over the communication system. "All personnel to battle stations. We are under attack by ships from the outer rim. This is not a drill." Ben and Lyra looked at each other in shock. They were in the middle of the most critical session yet, with Lyra's implants partially offline and her nervous system in a vulnerable state. If they stopped now, all their progress might be lost. But if they continued while the ship was under attack, they were risking their lives. "What do you want to do?" Ben asked. Lyra closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the faint stirrings of sensation in her legs for the first time in 15 years. When she opened them again, her expression was determined. "Finish it," she said. "Whatever happens to the ship, we finish what we started." The Sovereign's Grace shuddered as enemy weapons struck its shields, and the lights in the medical bay flickered ominously. Ben tried to focus on the delicate work of restarting Lyra's spinal implants, but it was hard to concentrate with the sound of battle raging around them. Through the walls they could hear the distant rumble of the ship's main guns returning fire, and the rushed footsteps of crew members running to their battle stations. "Hold still," Ben said, his hands working quickly over the control panel despite their trembling. The bioneural energy he had been exposed to over the past month was affecting his nervous system more severely now, but he pushed through the pain and disorientation. "I am almost finished with the restart sequence." Lyra lay on the examination table. Her eyes closed and her breathing steady despite the chaos around them. She could feel something happening in her spine, a tingling sensation that was different from anything she had experienced in 15 years. It was as if pathways that had been blocked for so long were finally beginning to open again. Another impact shook the ship, stronger than the previous ones. The emergency lighting cast strange shadows on the walls, and several pieces of medical equipment fell from their shelves. Ben caught one of the neural monitors before it could hit the floor, checking quickly to make sure it was still functioning properly. "Status report," came Captain Rex's voice over the communication system. "Enemy forces are attempting to board the ship. All security teams to defensive positions." Ben's blood ran cold. If enemy soldiers reached the medical bay, they would find the Empress in her most vulnerable state, with her spinal implants offline and her nervous system exposed. He looked around the room, trying to figure out how to protect her if attackers broke through the door. "Ben," Lyra said softly, her voice filled with wonder. "I can feel my toes." Despite everything happening around them, Ben smiled. The reset was working. After 7 sessions and countless hours of dangerous experimentation, Lyra's connection to her lower body was finally being restored. But they were not finished yet. The implants needed to be fully reactivated, and her nervous system had to completely reconnect with the life flow. The ship shook again, and this time, the lights went out completely. Emergency power kicked in, a few seconds later, bathing the medical bay in a dim red glow. Ben worked by the light of his handheld scanner, making the final adjustments to the neural interface systems. "The life flow," Lyra whispered. "I can feel it moving through my body again. It is like water flowing into a dried riverbed." Ben watched the monitoring displays as energy patterns began flowing through neural pathways that had been silent for 15 years. The readings were stronger than anything they had achieved in previous sessions, possibly because of the unusual energy fields the ship was passing through, or possibly because Lyra's nervous system had finally remembered how to work with her implants. The door to the medical bay suddenly burst open and 3 figures in dark armor rushed in, carrying energy weapons that hummed with deadly power. Ben recognized them immediately as soldiers from the Outer Rim worlds, the same faction that had attacked Lyra's diplomatic mission 15 years ago. "Empress Lyra," the lead soldier said, his voice distorted by his helmet's communication system. "By order of General Voss, you are under arrest for crimes against the outer colonies. Surrender now and you will not be harmed." Ben stepped protectively in front of the examination table, even though he had no weapons and no training in combat. "She is having a medical emergency," he said. "You cannot move her right now." The soldier laughed coldly. "The crippled Empress is having a medical emergency. How convenient." He raised his weapon toward Ben. "Step aside, human, or you will share her fate." But something extraordinary was happening behind Ben. Lyra's eyes had opened, and they were glowing with an inner light that grew brighter by the second. The life flow was not just returning to her body, it was flooding back with the force of 15 years of suppressed energy, like a dam bursting after holding back a massive reservoir. "I said step aside," the soldier shouted, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. He could see the light emanating from Lyra, and it was unlike anything he had witnessed before. "Ben," Lyra said quietly, her voice carrying a power that made the entire room vibrate. "Move away from the table." Ben looked back at her and gasped. Lyra was sitting up, her spine straight and strong, energy crackling around her like lightning. Her hair was floating as if she were underwater, and her skin was glowing with the same inner light as her eyes. The neural monitors around them were going crazy, registering energy levels far beyond anything they were designed to measure. Slowly, deliberately, Empress Lyra swung her legs over the side of the examination table. For the first time in 15 years, she placed her feet on the floor and stood up. The soldiers took an involuntary step backward. The woman before them bore little resemblance to the broken ruler they had expected to find. This was the Empress, of legend, the warrior who had united a dozen star systems through strength and wisdom. The accident that had taken away her ability to walk had not weakened her connection to the life flow. It had been building up inside her all this time, waiting for the chance to be released. "You made a mistake coming here," Lyra said, taking a step forward. Each movement sent ripples of energy through the air, and the metal walls of the medical bay began to resonate with a low, musical hum. "You should have stayed in the outer rim where you belong." The lead soldier fired his weapon, but the energy bolt dissipated harmlessly against the field of power surrounding Lyra. She raised her hand, and the soldier's weapon crumpled like paper. With another gesture, she sent all 3 attackers flying, backward through the doorway they had entered, their armor sparking and smoking from contact with her energy field. "Captain Rex," Lyra said, her voice carrying throughout the ship despite having no communication device. The life flow allowed her to project her thoughts directly through the ship's systems. "This is your Empress. I am resuming command. All enemy forces are to surrender immediately or face the consequences." Ben watched in amazement as Lyra actually walked, to the window that looked out into space. The enemy ships were visible in the distance, dark shapes against the stars. Lyra placed her hand on the wall, and Ben could feel the entire Sovereign's grace responding to her will. The ship's weapon systems, its shields, even its engines seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. "This is General Voss," came a transmission from the enemy fleet. "Empress Lyra is a broken ruler who cannot even stand on her own feet. Her empire is weak and ripe for conquest." Lyra smiled, and it was not a gentle expression. "General, I think you have been given some outdated information. What happened next would be talked about in military academies for centuries." Lyra did not just command the Sovereign's grace. She became one with it, channeling the life flow through the ship's systems in ways that should have been impossible. The vessel moved with the grace and speed of a living creature, dodging enemy fire while returning attacks with pinpoint accuracy. Enemy ships that had seemed formidable just moments before were disabled with surgical precision, their weapons destroyed, but their crews left unharmed. Within an hour, the entire enemy fleet had surrendered. General Voss himself was brought aboard the Sovereign's Grace in chains, his face pale with shock at seeing the Empress standing tall and radiating power like a star. 15 years ago, you crippled me during a mission of peace, Lyra told him as he knelt before her in the main throne room. You thought that breaking my body would break my spirit. You were wrong. Ben stood nearby, still barely believing what he had witnessed. The neural monitors had finally stopped registering impossible readings, and Lyra's energy field had settled to a steady glow that was visible, but not overwhelming. She was still the same person he had worked with in secret for weeks, but now she was also something more, a ruler who had rediscovered her full power. Your Majesty, Dr. Nala said, entering the throne room with a team of medical staff. We need to examine you immediately. The readings we detected were completely off the charts. You could have permanent damage from such a massive energy surge. Lyra laughed, a sound full of joy and freedom. Doctor, I have never felt better in my life. But please examine me all you want. I think you will find that sometimes the impossible becomes possible when you have the right help. She looked at Ben, who was trying to fade into the background, despite being the person most responsible for her recovery. Mr. Torres, please join me. Ben approached reluctantly, still overwhelmed by everything that had happened. Your Majesty, I should probably get back to the engine room. Chief Engineer Drac is probably wondering where I have been. Actually, Lyra said, I have a new position in mind for you. How would you feel about becoming the Chief of Innovation? Engineering? Your job would be to look at problems that everyone else considers impossible and find solutions that no one else has thought of. Ben stared at her. I am just a mechanic, Your Majesty. You are the mechanic who helped an Empress. Walk again, Lyra replied. You are the human who refused to accept that impossible means forever. My empire needs more people who think like you do. As the Sovereign's Grace continued its journey through space, word of the Empress's recovery spread throughout the galaxy. The story of the human mechanic who had succeeded where the greatest doctors had failed became legend. But more importantly, it marked the beginning of a new era for the Althari Empire, an era where old assumptions were questioned, where fresh perspectives were valued, and where the word impossible was treated as a challenge rather than a verdict. In the weeks that followed, Ben found himself working with teams of Althari engineers and scientists, applying human problem-solving techniques to challenges that had stumped them for years. The Empire began to innovate and grow in ways it had not done for centuries, inspired by the simple idea that every problem has a solution if you are willing to look at it from a different angle. And Empress Lyra, who had once been confined to a floating throne, now walked the corridors of her ship with confidence and strength, living proof that sometimes the greatest limitations exist only in our minds.